Who is the most disturbing person you've ever met face to face? Story 1. This story happened a few years ago, when I was around 8 or 9 years old. My old bedroom faced the street and was right next to our front door. It was very small, built in place of our old front porch. The roof slanted slightly downward toward the window, which took up most of the wall, and the bed only fit one way. The walls were painted purple, not a nice shade, more like the kind a child's room would have. My bed faced the door to my room, parallel to the window, while a closet filled the corner between the door and the window, making the space feel a little unusual. Every night I made sure to close the curtains completely because the thought of someone watching me from the street made me very uneasy, even at an age where such thoughts should not have crossed my mind. Still, I usually slept peacefully, without nightmares or sudden noises waking me. That was until the middle of the year, during a school break. I remember waking up to the sound of someone breathing. I couldn't move, couldn't even catch my breath. I was frozen. I clearly saw a man standing in the corner of my room, partly hidden behind the curtain, as if that could conceal him. Of course, I could still see him. He was just this dark figure, standing and watching. After what felt like hours, I somehow drifted back to sleep. In the morning, I told my mother what had happened. She brushed it off as a strange nightmare and told me I was fine, but the way she said it didn't sound convincing. Episodes like this, which she called sleep paralysis, continued for about a year. By the middle of the next year, when I was still about 8 or 9, I woke in the night again to the same man in the corner. This time I could move. I froze in place, though, because I knew he was really there. I could hear his faint breathing, as if he was trying to stay hidden from me just as much as I wanted to hide from him. The thought hit me. Had this man been there every night for the past year? I imagined running to the door, screaming for my mother, her calling the police, and the man finally being caught. But I couldn't. He was too close to the door. I spent the night staring at him, trying to fall asleep, until finally around 5 in the morning when the birds began to sing, I drifted off. When I woke, he was gone. The first thing I did was tell my mother, and I could see from her uneasy look that she already suspected something. Then I heard voices outside. It was our neighbor speaking with a police officer, giving a statement. Later I learned that around 6 in the morning, our neighbor had seen a man standing outside my window. She called the police, but he disappeared before they arrived. Other neighbors came forward, saying they had also seen him during the day, staring at our house. There were no signs of forced entry, only 2 footprints pressed into the flower bed beneath my window. My mother told the officers about what I had experienced, and they concluded that the man had probably been outside my window a year earlier, when I first saw him, and that what I thought was sleep paralysis was really his shadow cast by the streetlight. The entire time, he had been waiting patiently outside my room. I still wonder what could have happened if my neighbor hadn't noticed him on her way to work that morning. Just a few minutes later, and she might have missed him completely. Story 2. This story is about a neighbor I had once felt fairly comfortable around, but that changed almost overnight, and he began making me so uncomfortable that I ended up breaking my lease and moving away. I had lived in the same apartment complex for about 2 years, and across the hall was my neighbor Sam. At first he seemed like a normal guy, a single father of 3. Over those 2 years we often made small talk, and I believed he was a kind, decent person. Being twice my age, he felt almost like a father figure, someone who appeared willing to help whenever I needed it. Last summer my region went through a severe heat wave that our infrastructure simply was not built to handle. In the northern part of the United States, it is common for apartments and houses not to have air conditioning. With temperatures climbing over 100 degrees, we were all preparing to endure more than 90 degrees of heat indoors without much relief. I had purchased a portable air conditioning unit, but being from the southern part of the United States, I had no idea how to set it up properly, and the advice I found online only worked for vertically sliding windows. My window slid open horizontally, which created a unique problem. After struggling with the vent for a while, I decided to knock on my neighbor's door for help. That turned out to be a mistake. After helping me, he started sending text messages that immediately made me uneasy. The first said something like, "I could tell we were nervous around each other. I am shy. What are you up to tonight?" That disturbed me because it felt delusional. I was never nervous around him, and I certainly was not attracted to him, but in his mind he believed otherwise. I did not respond. He continued to text and call me every single day, even leaving voicemails. In one voicemail, he blew me a kiss. At that point, I started to feel genuinely scared because normal people do not keep contacting someone who is clearly ignoring them. I figured that if he was this unstable, outright rejecting him might actually be dangerous. So I just kept ignoring him. Anytime I came home late at night, I made sure to be on the phone with a friend in case I ran into him. The constant unwanted attention left me so on edge that I finally called my cousin, who was a lawyer, and told him everything. He asked for my neighbor's full name, and when he looked him up, he discovered that my neighbor was a convicted predator who had spent 5 years in prison for assaulting a 12-year-old girl. He also found records showing my neighbor had been arrested in 1988 for armed burglary, and that was only what had been officially caught. I started searching for a new apartment right away, but the soonest vacancy was 3 weeks away, which meant I had to wait. I went to the leasing office and explained the entire situation, asking to break my lease so I could leave as soon as the new place was available. One particular night, I was grateful that a male friend of mine happened to be visiting. The vent from my portable air conditioning unit had slipped out of the window, and as I was fiddling with it to get it back in place, I received another text message. It was from my neighbor. "I see you. You're looking really good today. Do you want some help?" Reading that, I froze. He had to be outside watching me through my window. I was shaking with fear. My friend saw how terrified I was, and when I explained, he went downstairs, pretended to be my boyfriend, and confronted Sam, telling him to stop contacting me. I was so shaken that I called out of work the next day and booked the next available flight back to my home state, choosing to spend the 3 weeks before my move at my best friend's apartment far away. I was not going to risk any chance of things escalating further. 3 weeks later, when the movers came to help me pack, I was cleaning out the fridge when my neighbor and I happened to leave our apartments at the same time. We made eye contact, and he licked his lips. That was the last time I saw him, and I am grateful every day that I moved away. Story 3. This happened when I was around 12 years old in the middle of the night at my house. My father worked the night shift, and since it was the weekend, I had stayed up late. Sometime between midnight and 1 in the morning, my father told me to lock the doors and go to bed, which I did. I went to my room and managed to fall asleep, but only for about an hour. At around 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of knocking on the back door. It scared me awake, but at first I told myself it must have been my father. Maybe he had forgotten something. Since I knew he always carried a key, I figured he would let himself in, and because I was exhausted, I stayed in bed. But the knocking continued. It stopped for a moment, only to start again, this time on the kitchen window. I tried to reassure myself it was just my father, but the thought made less and less sense. If it really was him, why wouldn't he just come inside with his key? My fear grew, and I refused to answer the door. If my father truly needed me to open, he would have called my phone, which was right beside me. The knocking started again at another window, and by now I was terrified. I was too afraid to get up and check. Then it shifted to the front door, louder and more forceful. That was when fear completely overtook me. I realized I couldn't move at all. My body was frozen. I couldn't scream, couldn't talk, couldn't even twitch a muscle. My heart sank as the knocking moved closer and closer to my bedroom window, the one with see-through curtains. Slowly, I shifted my eyes toward it, and my heart stopped. Standing outside, staring in, was a tall man wearing a dark ski mask. In the dim light, I thought I could see a skeleton pattern on the mask. He tilted his head slightly as if studying me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself over and over, "This isn't real. This isn't real." When I opened them again, the man was gone. I exhaled in relief until I heard a harsh whisper right beside me. "I'll cut you." Then everything went silent. A few moments later, I could finally move again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, shaking with fear. It didn't feel like a dream. I had never experienced sleep paralysis before, and everything about that night felt too real. I prayed I would never go through something like that again. It was one of the most frightening moments of my life. Since I had been home alone, there was no one to confirm what I had seen. But the next morning when my father came home, I asked him directly if he had come back earlier and knocked on the doors or windows. He told me he hadn't. Story 4. This happened in the summer 2 years ago when I was living with my mother. She had gone on vacation with a friend, which meant I had the entire house to myself. I usually enjoyed that kind of freedom. I could watch television without her hogging it and do whatever I wanted without any interruptions. That night was fairly typical. I spent my time in the computer room downstairs, chatting online, snacking on junk food, and playing World of Warcraft. With no reason to wake up early, my sleep schedule was completely off. It was around 4 in the morning when things took a very strange turn. While grinding in the game, I had music playing, but in the silence between songs, I suddenly heard what sounded like a cat letting out a high-pitched wail. We did not own a cat, but neighborhood cats often wandered around. I assumed maybe two were fighting in the yard, so I decided to go outside to scare them off before they hurt each other. When I stepped into the garden, I saw one cat's reflective eyes looking up at me before it bolted over the fence. That confused me. If there had only been one cat, what had made it cry out as if it were terrified? That was when I heard the sound of gravel shifting, the distinct crunch of footsteps in the decorative stones that lined part of the yard. My eyes darted toward the sound, though they were still adjusting after stepping out of the bright house into the pitch dark. And then I saw it, an unmistakably human-shaped shadow rising from behind a small bush near the fence. My heart stopped. Without hesitation, I slammed the back door shut and locked it. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, a trick of the darkness, the result of me being the kind of person who read scary stories alone late at night. Back in my room, I glanced out the uncovered window but saw nothing unusual, so I told myself I had overreacted and went back to my game. About 20 minutes later, I stood to get a drink, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange by the window. Instead of pure blackness, I saw something out of place. When I turned to look directly, my blood ran cold. Pressed against the glass was a masked face. It was not a playful Halloween mask, but something far more disturbing, made even worse by the darkness. Frozen in shock, holding an empty glass I had intended to fill with juice, I stared at this figure, standing in the garden at 4:20 in the morning. My heart skipped a beat. I broke eye contact and hurried into the kitchen. But seconds later, I heard heavy footsteps on the gravel. When I turned toward the kitchen window, the face was there again. This time, the figure slammed gloved hands against the glass, pressing closer. I thought I heard them mutter something, but I couldn't make it out. Panic set in. Should I run out the front door into the street, risking being chased? Or should I stay inside and call the police, hoping he wouldn't smash a window and climb in? I backed into the hallway, phone in hand, and finally called the police, practically shouting into the receiver, telling them everything. The person outside didn't leave. In fact, I swear I heard faint laughter. Then he smashed his head against the window so hard that the mask cracked, slipping enough for me to glimpse a receding hairline. That was when I realized he wasn't a teenager fooling around. He looked like a man in his 30s or 40s. My fear turned to desperation, and that was when I remembered an old pellet gun I had tucked away behind my computer. It didn't even work, but it looked completely real, like a replica of a M1911 pistol. With adrenaline coursing through me, I grabbed it, stormed toward the window, and shouted at the masked figure to back off, or I would shoot. He jolted in surprise, stumbled backward, and then, just like that, vanished into the darkness. The police arrived about 10 minutes later and searched the area but found nothing. They told me it was likely just a drunk playing a prank, but I knew what I had seen. The hairline, the build, the way he slammed into the window. This was not a teenager. It was an older man, maybe intoxicated, but dangerous all the same. I never saw him again, but from that night forward, I have never felt truly comfortable in that room when I am alone at night. Whenever I close the curtains, I can't help but remember that face staring in at me from the darkness. Story 5. This happened about a year before we moved out of what I thought was a very safe neighborhood, where I lived with my husband and some family friends. For years, nothing bad had ever happened, and I always felt comfortable there. I am a very short woman and considered disabled, even though I look healthy on the outside. Because of my condition, I cannot defend myself physically, so the idea of something happening to me was terrifying. Around that time, I had read stories on Facebook about traffickers targeting women and children at the local store right behind our house. That scared me enough to avoid going there without my husband, especially since news reports continued about people being followed or kidnapped near that same store. One afternoon, I was on my way to my job at a call center about 15 minutes away, located out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields. I worked the afternoon shift and was always one of the last to leave at night. On the way there, I had to stop for gas. That already had me uneasy because I hated going anywhere without my husband, but my car would not have made it otherwise. I felt some relief that the station was busy, but while I was pumping gas, a large van pulled up next to me. A man got out, began pumping his gas, then stepped around the pump and stood between me and my car. Smiling, he said, "Wow, your car is so clean. How do you get it so clean?" The comment left me stunned because my car was messy and covered with bugs. Then he added, "Why don't you show me how you get it so clean?" and reached out toward me. I pulled back quickly. Luckily, another car pulled up behind me and a man got out, which seemed to startle him, and he retreated to his van. Shaken, I finished pumping my gas, jumped in my car, locked the doors, and sped off. Minutes later, I noticed the van tailing me closely. I could see the man inside laughing with another guy. At first, I thought they might just be heading toward the freeway, but they didn't turn. The only destination left on that road was my workplace. Now in full panic, I called my husband, but he was at work and didn't answer. I sped up, trying to shake the van, but it followed me all the way to the call center. I pulled into the parking lot, right into a handicapped spot in front of the entrance, and ran inside, locking the doors behind me. Looking back, I saw the van stopped out front, the driver appearing angry. I hurried to my department and went straight to a friend who was ex-military and always carried firearms. Crying, I told him what happened. That night after work, I looked outside before leaving and saw a white van parked nearby. I could not tell if it was the same one. When I told my friend, he walked me out with his gun drawn. The van had moved directly behind my car. He escorted me safely, then drove behind me all the way home, making sure I was inside. The van turned off onto the freeway once we passed the exit. But the next afternoon, as I drove to work again, the same van pulled out of the gas station and started following me. This routine continued for about a week. They would follow me to work, leave, then reappear at night when we closed. My friend insisted they were studying my routine to find the right opportunity to grab me. He even offered me one of his guns, but I refused, afraid of getting into trouble since it was not registered in my name. Eventually, I told my husband everything, and he urged me to call the police. I do not know why I had not thought of it sooner. The next morning, I called and explained the situation before heading to work. As expected, the van appeared and began following me again. We were on a long, empty stretch of road when I noticed a car parked on the shoulder. As soon as the van passed it, the lights came on, and the police pulled them over. Later, I learned that the men in the van had multiple warrants for assault and attempted kidnapping. In the back of the van, the police found knives, rope, gloves, masks, and even chloroform. They believed I had been their next target. That day, my ex-military friend was out sick. I truly believe if I had not called the police, I might not have made it home. We eventually moved out of that neighborhood. Even though the new area is not as nice, I feel safer now, and I always carry pepper spray whenever I go out. Story 6. This happened when I first moved to London about 6 years ago to live with my partner. I didn't drive back then, so I relied on the bus to get to and from work, and then walked the short distance back to our flat. The walk never took more than 10 minutes and was through a well-lit street lined with shops and restaurants, so I had always felt fairly safe, at least until one November night. I had been in London for only a couple of months when a colleague asked if I wanted to join her for a drink after work. I'm not a big drinker, but it was Friday night, my partner was working late, and I was eager to make friends, so I agreed. We took the bus to a pub near her place. I had 2 or 3 drinks, just enough to feel a little tipsy, and decided to leave around 10 o'clock so I wouldn't be traveling too late through unfamiliar areas. On my way out, I briefly made eye contact with a man sitting at the bar. I gave a polite smile and left. The bus stop was visible from the pub entrance, only a short walk away. Halfway there, I got that unnerving prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was staring. When I glanced back, I saw the man from the bar, about 20 paces behind me, watching me. I tried to shake it off. It was London on a Friday night after all. Plenty of people were out, but unease settled over me. He reached the bus stop moments after I did, and though he hovered a few feet away, his eyes stayed locked on me. I caught him staring, expecting him to look away, but he didn't. Instead, he smirked and gave me a cold, deliberate wink that felt more threatening than playful. My bus arrived, and I hoped he wasn't going the same way, but he got on right after me. I sat near the driver, relieved the seat next to me was already taken, but the man sat across the aisle and stared with that same unsettling smirk. I tried to ignore him, sneaking glances only to see he hadn't looked away once. At every stop, I silently prayed he would get off, but he didn't. Then I realized the bus had diverted onto a dark housing estate instead of the usual well-lit route. I was now in an unfamiliar, silent neighborhood. Panic took over. When the next stop approached, I rang the bell at the last second and hurried off, hoping to catch him off guard. It didn't work. He followed. I considered calling the police, but feared if I was wrong, he'd lash out. I lied when he asked my name, telling him it was Amy. He smirked again and demanded my number. When I refused, his face hardened. He pressed again, asking where I lived, offering to walk me there. I lied again, saying a friend was coming. He studied me silently, then stepped closer, gritting his teeth as he repeated, "Give me your number." When I backed away, he lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, hissing, "There's no need to be like this." Terror surged through me. I twisted free and ran. He chased me, his eyes wide with anger, his footsteps pounding close behind. Fueled by fear and adrenaline, I sprinted blindly through unfamiliar streets until, by sheer luck, I saw two police officers ahead. Tears of relief streamed down my face as I bolted toward them, screaming for help. By the time I reached them, I was a shaking, breathless mess. But I pointed toward my pursuer. The man had already slowed, casually turning back toward the bus stop like nothing had happened. One officer ran after him while the other stayed with me, took my description, and eventually walked me all the way home. The pursuing officer lost him in the main street, and that was the last I ever saw of him. I am certain if I hadn't run into those police officers, he would have harmed me. From the moment we made eye contact in that pub, he had marked me as his target. The way he shifted from aggression, chasing me full speed, to cold composure the moment police were near, walking away as though he was innocent, showed just how dangerous he really was. I'll never forget his face, and I wouldn't be surprised if I saw it on the news one day, connected to something worse. To the man who followed me that night, let's never meet again. Story 7. I live in a downstairs flat in a small block, surrounded by other similar buildings. And unfortunately, some of my neighbors are loud and trashy, always shouting and arguing. It is not an exaggeration to say that the police are called out at least once a week because of disturbances. A few months ago, around 10 at night, I was sitting in the lounge when something caught my eye near the kitchen window. When I got up to check, I saw a man standing there with his hands up against the glass, staring inside. As I approached, he began knocking on the window. He looked rough, maybe like someone under the influence. I told him to go away, but he just kept standing there, staring at me with this unsettling smile that made me feel uneasy. I warned him that I was going to call the police, but he didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked off like nothing had happened. I am pretty sure he lives nearby because I have seen him since, but we have never spoken about that night. He still gives me chills whenever I see him, and while I know he was probably just high on something, the way he acted still really creeps me out. Story 8. This literally just happened, and I am still trying to decide whether I should be worried. Last night, my boyfriend came over, and while we were talking near my window, I noticed a guy standing outside on the sidewalk. At first, I wasn't sure if he was looking in because I didn't have my glasses on, but my boyfriend checked and confirmed that yes, he was staring directly at us. I live on the second floor, and my window has been open the past few days because the weather has been nice and my cat likes to sit there. I also have another window on the other side of my apartment, so when the man started moving in that direction, I rushed to see if he was looking in there too. He wasn't just looking at my place. He stared into my neighbor's windows as well, even crouching behind the bushes of the first floor flats to peek inside. That reminded me of the night before, when I was sitting at my desk and noticed a man standing still outside my window in the same way. He wasn't moving, just standing there in a hoodie and sweatpants. At first, I thought maybe he was letting his dog out, since people do that on the grass outside all the time, but he didn't have a dog. As soon as I stared back, he walked away. Now I'm creeped out because it's almost 5 in the morning and I had just gotten home from my late night job when this happened again. I can't tell if he is surveying the area for a burglary or if he is just some creep. But as a young woman living alone right now, it makes me feel very uneasy. Story 9. This happened about 4 or 5 years ago when I was around 19 or 20 years old. I lived in a small house on a plot of land in what was considered a nice neighborhood, even though the city itself had a sketchy reputation. There were two other houses on the same plot, one beside mine and another directly behind. On one particular summer evening, I was relaxing in the living room, watching YouTube videos. My roommate and her dog were out of town, and so was my boyfriend at the time, which meant I had the house entirely to myself. Since it was warm, I had all the windows open to let in the breeze. These were old windows with no built-in screens, so we used expandable ones that rested inside the frame, held in place by the window pane sitting on top. I remember sitting less than a foot away from one of those open windows, which felt meaningless at the time but became a terrifying thought after what happened. I got up to grab something from my bedroom, and as I walked in, I froze. There was a man's face looking directly at me through my bedroom window. For a split second, I questioned whether it was real. The only sound I managed to make was a confused, "Ugh." As I stood there staring, the man's face slowly moved away from the window. But the entire time, his eyes stayed locked on mine. What terrified me most was how calm and unbothered he seemed, as if he didn't even care that I had caught him. My body jolted into panic. I ran through the house, slamming all the windows shut, locking the doors and grabbing the biggest kitchen knife I could find. In a rush of bad judgment, I even stepped outside and called out, "Hello?" A few moments later, I saw a man walk past my house. Looking back, I know it was the same one who had been staring in at me. This all happened very late at night, with no one else around, and I ended up sleeping with that knife next to me. Not long afterward, I found out that the man was caught. He had been spying through the windows of underage girls in the neighborhood. To this day, I still shudder thinking about that night. So if by any chance you're out there, creepy window man, let's not meet again. Storytime. This happened just last night, and I have been unsettled ever since. I recently moved from Ireland to Bournemouth in the United Kingdom, and I am still adjusting to the area. Apparently, our apartment is not in the best neighborhood, which my coworkers were not surprised to hear after I told them about this. My boyfriend and I usually go to bed around 10 at night, since we wake up very early for our commute to work. Last night was no different. We went to sleep as usual and were out within minutes. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by extremely loud, angry screaming right outside our window. I checked the time. It was 11:58, not exactly a normal hour on a Wednesday night for such chaos. Curious and concerned, I went to the window. What I saw froze me in place. A man stood right outside, holding what looked like a bag of cans in one hand and a massive rifle, or at least some kind of long gun, in the other. He was screaming and cursing about his wife, yelling that she had taken his child away from him, and he pointed wildly at the surrounding windows. His voice carried through the entire street. Panicking, I shook my boyfriend awake. We sat together, terrified, not knowing what to do. Our phones were still on Irish networks, so we couldn't even call the police. The man's shouting only grew louder, and when I dared peek through the curtain again, he was pointing directly at our window, swinging the weapon in our direction. He wore glasses and a badly stained shirt, and when his eyes locked onto mine, everything seemed to stop for a moment. He froze, staring. Then, as if something snapped, he turned his back, only to suddenly spin around again and let out this horrible booming laugh that echoed across the street. At that point, I broke down crying, convinced he was capable of anything. My boyfriend thought about going outside, but I begged him not to, certain it would end badly. Then, without warning, the man went silent. I cautiously looked out again, but he was gone, vanished without a trace. I have no idea where he went or what happened to him afterward. All I know is that the image of him standing outside with that gun, screaming and laughing into the night, has left me completely shaken. I have been on edge all day, replaying it in my mind, and I can't shake the feeling that he could come back. Story 11. This happened in the early days of the pandemic, when restaurants had shut down and I was taking any work I could get. A friend told me about a medical office that needed someone to do light filing at night after the cleaning crew left, so I jumped at the chance. It felt safe compared to food service jobs, and since I didn't want to risk crowded buses, I decided to use a rideshare. Around 3 in the morning, I headed out, exhausted but relieved when a car pulled up right away, and the driver asked, "Uber?" I got in without thinking twice. The ride was taking longer than expected, but I was unfamiliar with the area and too tired to question it. I even drifted off to sleep. The driver seemed ordinary, young, clean-cut, listening to jazz. Nothing about him raised alarms at first. When we arrived, he nudged me awake, saying, "Ma'am, we're here." Embarrassed, I hurried out of the car and into the building. But the place was nothing like the medical office I had seen online. It was dark, semi-abandoned, with broken windows and construction debris scattered around. As I wandered deeper, my gut told me something was very wrong. My phone had barely any signal, so I tried pacing around to find a spot with better reception. Then I heard rustling from downstairs. I froze. The only stairwell I knew led right toward the noise. Convinced it was someone dangerous, I hid and tried to figure out an escape. Moments later, heavy footsteps came up the stairs. When the figure emerged, it wasn't some random squatter, it was my driver. At first I wanted to believe he had returned to help, but then reality hit. He had no reason to know this was the wrong address. He stood there calm but breathing heavily, blocking my way out. Every instinct in me screamed that he had bad intentions. On pure adrenaline, I dove into a dilapidated stairwell and let myself fall. Bruised but not broken, I scrambled up and searched blindly for an exit. Suddenly a door burst open, flooding me with light. At first I thought it was another threat, but then a voice shouted, "Police! Get down, hands where I can see them." Shaking and half incoherent, I complied. Once outside, the officer explained he had spotted a suspicious car idling near a condemned building and decided to check it out. That was when everything clicked. The car. My actual Uber driver had been waiting elsewhere, sending me messages I never saw because my phone was in airplane mode. The man who picked me up had never been my driver. I frantically explained, and when we checked the app later, the real driver had sent multiple messages and eventually canceled the trip. Whoever had pulled up to me that night was an imposter, a stranger who happened to stop and lure me into his car. I could only give the police a vague description. Young, Caucasian, brown hair, goatee, driving a sedan. 1 out of 100 men in the city. I will never know what his plan was, but I am grateful to be alive. That night taught me a harsh lesson. Always check the license plate. Always confirm the driver's name. Because you truly never know who might be waiting when you step into the dark. Story 12. I live downtown in a Midwestern city where there are plenty of bars, and I have a couple I go to regularly. I've been a familiar face there for about 7 months, and I know most of the staff pretty well. One night, around 11:30, I went out to meet up with a good friend of mine who works second shift. We hadn't seen each other in a while, so we ended up drinking more than usual, chatting and catching up. After walking them back to their apartment, I crossed the street to Bar B, where I ran into another friend. We shared what was left of a pitcher of beer, and that's when the creepy guy first appeared. I was already a bit drunk, and when I'm in that state, I tend to be friendly. I'll wave to strangers, buy someone a beer, or just chat casually. That's normal bar culture where I live. This guy waved at me from across the bar after I played a song on the jukebox he seemed to like. I waved back politely and he came over to start a conversation. He asked if I came there often, and I explained I was a regular. That Bar A across the street had practically been a second home to me. Not long after, my friend left, so I said goodnight and made sure they got a cab. As I started walking over to Bar A, the guy followed me, saying he liked going there too. I brushed it off, but when I sat down inside Bar A in one of my usual spots, he sat right next to me. A couple of minutes later, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, I chose a different seat to avoid him, but he moved to sit near me again. By then I was drunk enough to be irritated, so I got up once more, this time letting my bartender friend clean the spot I had been sitting at so I'd have an excuse to move. It was close to closing time, and I told the bartender quietly that the guy was making me uncomfortable. My friend let me stay after hours until he was sure the man had left. About 15 minutes later, when I finally stepped outside, The guy was waiting for me. He asked if he could walk me home, but I politely declined. It was about a mile walk. Immediately, I called my boyfriend, telling him quietly what was happening. He told me to keep him on the line and hurry home. The man followed me anyway. I picked up my pace and so did he. Twice he called out, asking again if I wanted him to walk me home. I told him firmly that my boyfriend was on the phone and I was fine. The last time he stopped me, he actually put his hand on my shoulder. That was the final straw. I pulled out my pepper spray and told him very firmly that if he didn't stop following me, I would use it. He backed off and disappeared into the night. I made it home safely, though I woke up with a brutal hangover the next morning, still shaken by what had happened. So to the creepy guy who followed me from bar to bar and tried to follow me home, let's not meet again. I know you're a regular, but if I ever see you again, I'll be ready. Story 13. I am a 25-year-old woman living in a relatively safe country in Asia with a very low crime rate. This incident happened about 5 or 6 years ago on a quiet afternoon when my mother had gone out to run a quick errand nearby, leaving me home alone. I live in an apartment block where each floor has 6 units, and our living room window opens directly onto the common corridor. Because of this, delivery men or salespeople often mistake our window for a neighbor's. I was scrolling on my phone in the living room when I heard knocking on my neighbor's door. Through the tinted window, I could see 2 men standing outside, one of them calling out, "Delivery!" After no one answered, they started to leave. But as one of them passed my window, he stopped. He placed both hands on the glass, leaned in, and pressed his face against a scratch in the tint to peek inside. I froze as I saw one of his eyes staring right at me. Terrified, I dropped to the floor and crawled into the nearest room, whispering a quick call to my mother, begging her to come home. I stayed hidden for what felt like forever, listening closely for any sound and nervously peeking out to see if he was still there. About 15 minutes later, my mother returned. She had actually passed the same delivery man in the lobby on her way up. When she heard what had happened, she was furious. She looked out of our kitchen window and saw him still lingering outside, staring up at our unit. She gave him such an angry glare that he quickly left, got into his van, and drove away. Ever since that day, we've made sure to cover our living room window whenever we are not home, or even when we are, just in case someone tries to peek in again. Story 14. I had just moved into a new neighborhood when I started noticing something that has left me deeply unsettled. My neighbor, a man I do not know at all, comes outside every night as soon as it gets dark and stares directly at my house. He doesn't move during this ritual. It usually lasts anywhere from 20 minutes to a full hour. His face has this unnerving, blank look that makes my skin crawl. I have called the police several times, but they haven't been much help. One evening, I decided to confront him in my own way. I stood on my porch and stared back, hoping he would get uncomfortable and leave. But he didn't even flinch. On another occasion, I tried knocking on his door, but the house was eerily silent. No one answered. When I turned back toward my own porch, I nearly jumped. He was standing inside his window, staring straight at me with that same chilling expression. I have now lived here for several months, and not once has he missed a night of the staring. One evening, while taking out the trash, I saw him standing at the end of my driveway. I tried to break the tension by saying hello and asking what he was doing, but he just stood there in complete silence, not even blinking. The unease I felt made me retreat quickly, certain something bad might happen if I stayed outside any longer. Even now, as I sit here writing this, he is outside again, staring at my house like clockwork. I live alone. I am 45 years old, and I have no idea how to handle this. It feels like I am being watched every single night, and I don't know what he is capable of. Story 15. This happened years ago, and I have never told it before because it took me a long time to stop feeling terrified. I was young, working at a hotel that also had banquet halls and a restaurant. I was friendly with everyone. Some co-workers were friends, others I only greeted in passing. I worked most nights after school and weekends, so I was always present for big events like Mother's Day brunch or holiday parties, and I would dress up for the occasion. One Saturday morning, I walked into work, and the front office manager, clearly panicked, asked to speak with me privately. He began questioning me about my interactions with his son, who worked in another department. His son, let's call him S, was not a friend, just an acquaintance. He was a little awkward, but I was polite to him. The manager asked if I had made plans with S the previous night or ever mentioned marrying him. Confused, I told him no. That's when he explained what had happened. The night before, S's parents found him in his room blasting loud music, rocking back and forth under a blanket. Underneath, he had a backpack filled with rope, a knife, and drugs. When they confronted him, he said he was meeting me that night and that we were getting married. My name had never even been mentioned in their home before, so they tried reasoning with him, but when he wouldn't calm down, they had to call the police. He was sent to a mental institution for several months. His father looked pale like he hadn't slept, and I was left shaken and confused. From then on, S was banned from the property, and I had to be escorted to my car every night. Later that day, my coworker T told me that S had tried to get him to come outside the same night, yelling at him to stay away from me. T thought it was strange but dismissed it as S just being odd. Months later, after S was released, I let my guard down. One day he followed me home and knocked on my door. I foolishly opened it without checking first, and there he was. My blood ran cold. He asked to talk, and in a panic I stepped outside, thinking I could run if I needed to. He rambled about how he was better now, and claimed to be back in school even though it was summer. He brought up what I had worn to Mother's Day brunch 2 years earlier, asking if I still had the dress. He even asked me to dinner. I lied about working and brought up his father to deflect until he finally left. The next time he showed up, my brother answered the door and threatened him to never come back. After that, I would sometimes spot him driving around near my house, and I hid. I never found out what became of him. For years, I lived in fear of being followed. It wasn't my fault, but it changed me. I became more introverted, stopped dressing the way I used to, and avoided eye contact with strangers. If someone fixates on you, it isn't about what you did or didn't do. It's about them. Story 16. I work overnight stocking shelves, and last year a guy around my age was hired. At first he seemed normal. He started hanging around me and another co-worker on breaks, and eventually I considered him a friend. He told me he was autistic, which made me more forgiving of certain behaviors. And at the time I was struggling mentally, so having someone validate me felt nice at first. But then he began to get touchy. During private conversations, he would rub my back. At first I said nothing, not wanting to be rude. But when it continued, I told him to stop. He apologized, only to do it again later. The look on his face when he touched me wasn't friendly. It was predatory. Around that time, he confessed something disturbing he had done to a friend in the past. He acted remorseful, even cried, and claimed they were on civil terms now. It should have been a huge red flag, but I made excuses, still giving him the benefit of the doubt. He hung out with me and my boyfriend a couple of times, and things only got stranger. He constantly tried to one-up my boyfriend in sarcastic ways. One night, when a Sewell song played in his car, he let out a long, unsettling laugh. He touched my back again when my boyfriend briefly left the room, pretending it was comfort. He acted flirtatious whenever my boyfriend wasn't around. Eventually, I had enough and cut him off completely, though I still had to work with him. That was last summer, and we hadn't even been friends long. Since then, he's crossed boundary after boundary. He comes in early every night to set out my work supplies. He leaves me food, water, and small gifts, things I had casually mentioned liking in conversation. He waits for me in the parking lot so we can drive together. Once he even waited half an hour while I chatted with another coworker. He stands outside his house to watch me pass on my way home, since I have to drive down his street. He still texts me despite never getting a response. At work, he leaves my initials written in marker on a cart and leaves that same cart for me every night. Even when I erase it or write stop, he writes them again the next day. Once he left a note saying, "You really do hate me." Whenever he walks by me, he looks either sad or angry. Management has talked to him and HR is involved, but he continues the behavior. He still sets out my cart with water, still writes my initials, still lingers. He puts on this image of being helpful and kind, but the persistence and fixation terrify me. I just hope it doesn't escalate. Story 17. This happened a few years ago when my best friend and I were seniors in high school, around 2016. We had gone on a weekend trip to visit my grandmother a couple of hours away from our town in Georgia. The town we lived in was small by state standards, but still one of the largest within a few hours. To get to my grandmother's house, we had to drive about 2.5 hours through tiny, isolated towns. quiet, rural places with endless corn and cotton fields, hardly any street signs, no stoplights, and absolutely no cell service. On our way back home, we stopped at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. The convenience store looked deserted from the outside, with only a few snacks inside, and not a single car or person around. I paid for gas with my card at the pump because I didn't want to leave my 5'1", 100-pound friend alone in the car while I went inside. Just as I started pumping gas, another car pulled up on the opposite side of the single pump. I already felt uneasy because of how isolated the place was, so I stayed outside with my driver's door open, making sure my friend could see and hear everything. A thin man, maybe in his late 50s, got out of the car. At first, it looked like he was going to pump his own gas, but instead, he walked around the pump, maneuvered around my open door, and came within a foot of me. He asked if he could pump my gas for me. Luckily, I had the nozzle locked so the gas was flowing on its own. I immediately stepped between him and the door, ready to shut myself inside or slam it to protect my friend if necessary. I politely told him no, thank you. He smirked, looked me up and down and said, "Pretty girls like you shouldn't be out here alone. You shouldn't have to do this by yourself. Let a man help you, baby." Then he placed his hand over mine and tried to grab the pump I was holding. My heart dropped. I yanked my hand away and slammed the car door shut, thinking the last thing I wanted was for him to jump in and drive off with my friend inside. At that point, my nerves snapped. I remembered advice I had read online about how it's better to seem rude than to risk being polite in a dangerous situation. My voice was steady when I said, "Sir, get away from me. I can pump my own gas." I already said no. Leave us alone. His smirk vanished. He raised his chin, locked eyes with me, and just stared. I held his gaze, determined not to look away. By then, I had enough gas to get us far away, so I pulled the nozzle out, tossed it back onto the pump, and jumped in the car. Without breaking eye contact, I started the engine and drove off before he moved an inch. As we sped away, I checked the rearview mirror. His car wasn't even pumping gas. He had pulled in just to approach me. My friend was shaking the entire ride home, whispering that she probably would have let him pump the gas if it had been her. But I knew better. I was just grateful that I'd stayed alert and firm enough to get us out of there. So to the helpful gas station man in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, let's not meet again. Story 18. A little over a year ago, I worked the overnight shift at a gas station near my house. I was 31 at the time, and yes, I know to some people it seems risky for a woman to work alone during the graveyard shift. But honestly, it was usually quiet there. Maybe 30 customers total in an 8-hour night. And the sheriff's office was literally right across the street, only about 20 feet away. I figured I'd be safe. It was around 3:30 in the morning when I went outside to sweep the lot, check the trash, and sneak a cigarette. I had one headphone in, half distracted, when I noticed a figure across the road in the sheriff's parking lot. His back was to me, and he was swaying back and forth, head down. It honestly looked like he was relieving himself against the wall of the sheriff's office, which was bizarre considering it was right there in plain sight. The building closed at 4 in the afternoon and didn't reopen until 6 in the morning, so it was deserted. By the look of his ripped white t-shirt, I realized I'd seen him earlier in the night. He had come into the store about 4 hours before, clearly drunk, and had given me creepy vibes. I didn't want to engage, so I turned away and focused on my cigarette. For a few minutes, it worked, but then another car pulled into my lot. The man across the street noticed, looking back and forth between the car and me. When that customer left, I walked her outside, and we both heard him yelling angrily to himself, like he was in a full-blown argument with no one. She told me to be careful. I tried to laugh it off with a joke, but inside I felt uneasy. Now he was closer to the road, facing my lot, staggering and screaming words I couldn't make out. His eyes had this wild, dark look that made my stomach turn. From experience, I knew people like that, crazy-eyed, were usually the most unpredictable. I decided to be cautious. Back inside, I quickly typed up a temporarily closed sign just in case he came over. As I was about to tape it up, I saw him stumble across the street toward my side. I barely managed to lock the second door before he staggered into the lot. I motioned cut across my throat with my hand and shook my head, trying to signal clearly that the store was closed. At first he turned away, but then he screamed at me. Not a simple, angry shout. This was full-throated rage, violent, arms flailing, like he was possessed by fury. That was it. I picked up the phone and called the police. Good thing I did, because as soon as I hung up, he came right back to the door. He pulled, he pounded, and then he actually backed up and tried to ram the glass doors with his body. The doors were sturdy enough, but it was still terrifying to watch. In a moment of panic, I yelled through the glass that I had called the cops and they'd be there any second. That was a mistake. As soon as he heard me, he bolted. By the time officers arrived, he had vanished. They searched the roads and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but he was nowhere to be found. On foot, there was no obvious place for him to disappear to, which made it even creepier. He never harmed me, and since he wasn't found, I didn't bother filling out a full police report. But the fear stayed with me. I was safe behind locked glass that night, but from then on, I worked the rest of my shifts constantly checking over my shoulder. Maybe if I hadn't warned him about the cops, they would have caught him. I'll never know. What I do know is I'm thankful I don't work there anymore. Story 19. This happened about 4 years ago when I was working as a bartender, and it changed the way I live my life. Ever since, I refused to go into a store alone after midnight. For context, I was 25 at the time, blonde, slender, and working a busy Friday night shift. After the dinner rush, we realized we were running low on bar necessities. Lemons, limes, bitters, that sort of thing. So my manager sent me to a 24-hour grocery store down the road. I moved quickly through the store, grabbing everything we needed without issue, until I hit the liquor aisle. 2 country-looking guys, maybe around my age, were there. They immediately stared at me and whispered to each other. I had a bad feeling, so I snatched what I needed and hurried to the self-checkout. But they followed me. Standing right next to me at the register, I could see them more clearly. One tall and muscular, the other shorter and heavier. Both looked dirty, their eyes bloodshot, like they'd been drinking or using something. They ignored their own groceries and focused on me instead. When our eyes met, I gave a quick, polite smile, hoping they'd take the hint. Instead, the tall one tried to chat me up. "Looks like you're ready to party, huh?" I brushed it off with, "It's not for me." He pressed on. "Oh, must be for your boyfriend then." I gave another polite smile, rolled my eyes a little, and tried to focus on finishing. That's when his tone shifted. He leaned in closer, so close I could smell him, and said, "You could come hang out with us tonight. We'll show you a real good time." When I refused again, he got angry. His voice hardened. "I see how it is. You probably only go for rich guys or doctors. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you aren't. We can teach you a lesson." Chills ran through me. I turned slightly so my body blocked my purse, slipped my hand inside, and pulled out the small pocket knife I always carried, sliding it up my sleeve while pretending to look for my wallet. At the same time, I caught the eye of the self-scan attendant and gave her a wide-eyed look, silently pleading for help. As if on cue, my machine started beeping with an error. The attendant, a tall, strong woman, came over. The guys instantly switched from threatening to fake friendly, acting like we were all pals. They even joked that I was trying to steal something. The attendant wasn't buying it. She gave them a cold stare, canceled my order, and said firmly, "Sorry, this machine isn't working. Let's get you checked out at a register." She gently put her hand on my back and shot me the same wide-eyed look I'd given her, a silent way of saying, "I see what's happening. I've got you." She walked me to a register near the security office, scanning my items while keeping an eye on the men, who hovered nearby and eventually went to the exit. She whispered that nothing had actually been wrong with the machine. She had staged it because she could see the situation escalating. She told me she'd already called security to be ready to walk me to my car. Sure enough, when I finally finished and we peeked outside, the men were still there. They had moved their truck to face the front of the store, with its headlights shining directly at the doors, like predators waiting for prey. The attendant and security guard walked with me to my car. We made it clear we weren't going to let me leave until those men were gone. When they realized we were all watching them, they peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, clearly furious that they didn't get what they wanted. I thanked that worker and the guard endlessly. I even wrote letters to management and corporate praising them, because I'm convinced they saved my life, or at the very least, saved me from something I'd never want to live through. That woman didn't know me at all, but she was willing to step in and protect me. She deserves every bit of recognition she can get. That night taught me a permanent lesson. No more late-night shopping trips alone, never again. Story 20. This happened shortly before Christmas, on a Friday afternoon. I was shopping at a small local Walmart with my kids and a male friend. Normally, I avoid holiday crowds at all costs, but we were at the point of ketchup sandwiches in my house, and groceries were a necessity. I was in the pharmacy section, trying to pick out a box of hair dye, with both of my kids sitting in the cart. My friend had wandered into another section to take a work call. As I compared boxes, my son, who was in kindergarten at the time, smiled over my shoulder, and my toddler daughter, who mostly spoke in fragments back then, suddenly said, "Creepy." I turned around, and there he was, a middle-aged man, standing about 20 feet behind me, silently watching my daughter. People often commented on her looks, but this wasn't the usual kind of attention. My stomach dropped. Something about it was off. I pushed my cart out of the pharmacy area and into grocery, buzzing my bond bracelet 3 times. The code my friend and I had agreed on for "call me right now." Within moments, he was at my side. I told him about the man, though I admitted I hadn't gotten a good look. My friend, however, had noticed him too. "He was walking behind you on the way to pharmacy," he said, which only made the unease in my stomach grow stronger. He promised that if Creepy showed up again, he'd say something. We kept shopping, and for a little while, I thought maybe it was over. Then, while in the refrigerated section debating coffee creamers, my toddler spoke again, this time saying, "Santa." I turned and my heart froze. The same man had put on one of those oversized plush Santa heads sold in the store and was standing behind us again, waving at my children. I was on high alert. I grabbed the cart and speed walked toward the front as fast as I could manage with kids and groceries weighing me down. My friend followed close behind but didn't say anything. I practically ran to an open checkout lane and started piling items onto the conveyor. The cashier noticed how shaken I looked and asked if I was okay. I told her what was happening. She immediately asked if we could still see him. My friend, who was tall, scanned the store and spotted him lingering by the grocery exit. The cashier wasted no time and alerted a manager. At this point, I just wanted to get my kids out safely. The manager headed toward the grocery exit, so we decided to leave through the other side. But when we stepped outside, Creepy was there waiting for us, still trying to make eye contact with my toddler. That was the breaking point. My friend, 6'5" and over 250 pounds, puffed himself up and roared, "Back the fudginess off!" The man stopped in his tracks immediately. As we hustled toward the car, the manager and 2 other employees approached him. That was the last we saw of Creepy. I was shaking so badly that my friend had to buckle the kids into their seats while I threw the groceries in the trunk. We sped away, and only after a while did my breathing start to return to normal. Even now, months later, I still think about it. Maybe the man was mentally ill. Maybe he wasn't. The area does have an outpatient hospital that treats people with addiction, mental illness, and other struggles. But no matter what, the way he followed us, stared at my toddler, and even put on a Santa mask to get closer, it was terrifying. I always bragged about being a protective mama bear, but the way he crept up behind me left me completely stunned. Holiday-motivated grocery creep. Let's not meet again. Story 21. I went to a burrito place one afternoon and had what seemed like a completely normal interaction. Nothing unusual at all, just placed my order, handed over my phone number for the rewards program, and left. I had a free chips and guacamole coupon from downloading the app, so when the cashier asked for my number, I didn't think twice. Less than 10 minutes later, once I was home, I realized something strange had happened. The cashier, who had very distinctive features like bright blue hair, had saved my number, used it to look me up, and followed me on Instagram. When I checked their page, it was obvious. Their profile showed a cup from the same burrito place. They lived in the same town, and there were no mutual connections. It didn't take long to put the pieces together. The employee had looked me up using the number I'd only given for the rewards program. It made my skin crawl. We hadn't even had a friendly conversation, just a quick, transactional interaction. So why would they do that? I immediately blocked them and contacted customer service to report what happened. I'm hoping nothing comes of it, but I can't shake the worry about whether they'll retaliate. Something about the whole situation feels off, and it's left me feeling unsafe in a place I never expected.